joining us right now is a guy who's going to put me at ease and maybe hopefully you at ease if you have a fear of flying. He is an aviation psychologist. Dr. Lucas van Gerwen, the director of the Valk Foundation. It is midnight where he is, so I got to thank him tremendously for joining us here. He's written several books on the topic of fear and flying. Dr. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us here on News and Experts.
No problem. Glad to be with you.
So did you hear me in my setup about getting on a propeller plane? Is this a common fear? Or before we get to that, let's talk about the general fears of flying. I mean, you were a pilot, right? And you're a clinical psychologist. So how common is this fear of flying?
Yeah, it's quite common. Just in the U.S., 26 million people have a form of fear of flying. And of course, the degree varies, but it's still quite a lot of people.
You know, one of the things, Dr. Lucas, is the fact that when you boil it down to its most simplest form, and maybe that's where fear comes from, is from ignorance, but in its simplest form, you have this big metal tube 30,000 feet above the air filled with flesh and gasoline and baggage. It doesn't seem, when you think about it like that, it doesn't seem like it's really safe. But is it the idea that it is that ignorant point of view that when you understand the technology and the science, that's what really should make you feel better?
No, that's just for a few people. If you are afraid of heights or if you have claustrophobic feelings, that information doesn't help you at all. It's only people who like to stay in control or people who like to know about the techniques about flying. That's helpful for them, but for the rest of the majority, it doesn't help them at all.
Wow, that's such a great point because, I'm a bit of a control freak. So I could see you're right. That does work. So for some people, and I had never even thought about that, the idea of being claustrophobic, I mean, the fear of heights I get. So maybe you can control the fear of heights of closing the window and not looking out there, and maybe you can kind of get away with it like that. But is claustrophobia way more of an issue than a lot of times, too? Is that kind of a bigger chunk of that, knowing that you're just confined to this small space?
Yeah, there are two large groups involved in the fear of flying people. That is, people who have a form of feeling trapped in, the people who have claustrophobia, and the people who are control freaks, who like to stay in control or over themselves or over their surroundings.
It is News Talk AM 1470 WMGG. I am Alex Senojosa. We're talking to Dr. Lucas van Gerwen. He is the director of the Valk Foundation. Valk.org is the website. All right, this is interesting. Afraid of flying, there's an app for that. There's an app for people who are afraid of flying?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's called the Flight app, and it helps you through your flight. It gives you lots of information about all the sounds of the movements. But the main thing, there's also a panic button on there. Every moment that you don't feel very comfortable, just push the panic button and a therapist will help you to that difficult moment.
Wow. Did you create this?
Yeah, it's our foundation who created that, yeah.
You're a genius. That's a really cool app. The Flight app. Okay, that's great. Now let me ask you this, Doctor. The propeller planes. Are people way more afraid of propeller planes than maybe regular jets? Because, Doc, that's my thing. I have no problem getting on a regular jet, but if getting on a propeller plane freaks me out. Is that more common, and where does that usually come from?
No, that's not more common. There are so many underlying complaints for fear of flying, but I understand your point very well, because flying in a propeller plane, it flies lower, so it means you hit more weather, more turbulence, and maybe you have a feeling it's a kind of old-fashioned thing, but it's as safe as a jet plane. So, but it's really different from person to person. What are the underlying complaints? And your idea about propeller planes, that is bringing you your anxiety.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So it's just that feeling, and maybe that's really what it is, the idea of the turbulence or having to actually fly through the weather. But again, there's an app for that now, the Flight app. Is it free? How much does it cost for this app?
No, it's not free. It's just a few dollars, but it gives you a better life, not just in flying, but also in your anticipation of the flight. So it will do a lot for you, and it's just for a few bucks, less than a pack of cigarettes. That's the cost of it.
Okay, and it's worth it. For someone like me, for an entire week, hasn't been able to sleep. I got another entire week of sleepless nights. I guess if I invest a few bucks in this to make me feel better, it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, there are also a few exercises on there that help you to relax and that help you to catch your sleep even quicker.
Okay, that's great. Let me ask you, did you just figure out as a clinical psychologist and a pilot, it almost made sense for you to come in here and create the what you did with the app and also the Valk Foundation? Like, how did you decide this is what you wanted to do?
First I became a pilot, and as a pilot I was driving in one of the planes you don't like, in a propeller-driven plane, and somebody gets very, very scared. I thought, that is strange on a beautiful day, blue sky, and from that moment on I started to study psychology, and I combined the two. And now I'm also the head of the International Forum for Fear of Flying around the globe. So I'm the head of the board, and I help other countries to create facilities to help people to conquer their fear of flying.
Let me ask you, from someone like you who's really knowledgeable, do you look at people like me like we're silly? I mean, I know as a clinical psychologist you're not supposed to technically, but does it seem silly sometimes when people are afraid like that? Because, like, for example, I look at people who are afraid of public speaking like they're silly. But then, if their fear's just as bad as my fear of flying, I guess I kind of feel bad about that. How do you look at those of us, especially because you've been a pilot?
To work with people who are afraid of flying, that's a fantastic job. You know why? People who are afraid of flying are most of the time more intelligent. They have a better fantasy than people who don't have fantasy, because the only reason for your fear is that you have negative thoughts about realistic things. And only intelligent people have those thoughts. So it's a great majority to work with, and it's also a complaint that you can help people with it to overcome it. So that's fantastic.
What a great answer. Basically, he just said, I'm too smart for my own good. And how can I argue with that? That's absolutely true. Doctor, I got to thank you so much. Dr. Lucas van Gerwen, director of the Valk Foundation. More importantly, Valk.org. That's VALK.org. You can go get this app, the Flight app. It has a panic button. It has information. You got to go get this if you've ever had a fear of flying. Dr. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us here on News and Experts.
It was my pleasure.
There he is, the great doctor. That guy's a genius. I got to tell you why I think he's a genius. He basically said, Alex, if you have this fear of flying, that means that you are a thinker. You're smart. You think of all things. Yeah, you may drift a little bit to the negative, but you have a very creative mind. Unfortunately, all the creative mind that's coming out of you right now with this propeller plane is it crashing. And that's all you can think about. And that really is all I can think about. But nonetheless, the doctor said I was too smart for my own good, and I'll take that. We'll take a break. We'll come back on the other side. Knucklehead of the Day is next. In addition to that, a story about some movies. And an update on Dumb and Dumber 2, not so good. That's next on News Talk.